In every collective, once it has existed for at least a few months, its leaders emerge, its favorites appear. In the military environment, of course, they became people who were characterized by personal bravery and high skill. In our regiment among pilots, navigators, gunner radiators, there were a lot of such people, but not all of them enjoyed the same authority, let alone adoration. Someone, perhaps, was not too ambitious, someone arrogant and harsh, someone too selfish, someone simply lacked a sense of camaraderie, and even personal charm. Junior Lieutenant Alexander Bogachev, a link commander, did not strive for glory it found him. Combat luck always accompanied him, and in his 20s he became a true master of bombing strikes. When Bogachev was given the floor at classes, at practical conferences, at meetings, all the whispers and murmurs subsided. Not only newcomers, but also veterans listened to him attentively, because there was always some revelation, some novelty in his words. He never shied away from meeting the enemy. On the contrary, he was always looking for it. I have already written about how, after an unsuccessful attack approach, he made a circle and attacked the convoy a second time, already without topmast support. Several times he brought his plane to the airfield on one running engine on his machine, after landing counted up to 1,500 holes from shrapnel and bullets. He managed to get through any curtains of fire where others were dying, and smash the enemy at point-blank range. Luck? Luck? Maybe both? But above all, of course, skill. Short stature and by no means a heroic build, with a face attractive but generally ordinary, unremarkable. In addition, quite taciturn and smiling, Bogachev did not belong to those lucky people who could become the soul of any company. He was not in a hurry to join the conversation, if the topic did not concern him directly, and could keep silent in the middle of a heated argument, if his opinion was not asked, or if the subject of the dispute did not seem to him serious enough. His non-smiling and taciturnity was often misunderstood, saying, "Sasha should have a rocket to take off now. His mood would be lifted at once." In the air he was transformed. It was as if he was born to fight. He lived and breathed combat. They loved to fly with him. Those who were assigned to the group, which was to fly under the command of Bogachev, believed that they were lucky because he was almost always accompanied by good luck. At the moment of greatest nervous tension, when it is about to throw the plane into the fiery furnace, in the helmet sounded his calm voice, "Well, friends, do not shame the Russian land," which served as a signal to deploy the group to attack. A quirk? Maybe. A deviation from accepted norms? Undoubtedly. But the pilots themselves said that these words were no less effective than the usual dry command. They did not demand obedience. They appealed to the heart, to the conscience. And who were they coming from? From Bogachev himself. That meant something. Once, I remember, we were waiting for his group to return from a combat mission. 3 torpedo carriers, one after another, landed on the runway, and roaring engines slowly rolled along the taxiway to shelters. And only the airplane with the flight number 23 was not among them. Bogachev did not return. Everyone who was at that moment on the airfield froze in anxious anticipation. It cannot be. Usually technicians, mechanics, motorists met their aircraft and accompanied it to the parking lot. This time no one moved from their seats. Bogachev had not returned. People silently looked at each other, perplexed, shook their heads. No one dared to say aloud a terrible assumption, which was a heavy burden on everyone. Really? I didn't want to believe it. And then the familiar silhouette of a torpedo carrier appeared at the horizon. Dozens of pairs of eyes anxiously and hopefully watched its approach. 23, at maximum speed, passed at a breakneck speed over the command post, and many throats simultaneously responded with a rapturous shriek. Sasha's back. And everyone broke from their seats and ran to the end of the runway, where the airplane was to stop after the run. And the 23rd made a slide, and a burst of large-caliber machine gun fire pierced the sky overhead, followed by another one. So 2 more floating vultures found a grave at the bottom of the sea. Bogachev turned around and went to land. He was perplexed to see so many people near the airplane. "I had to fix the result of the impact. It's my duty," he reluctantly excused himself. So I lagged behind my own. Major Levin, the base commander, ordered to prepare a roast pig for lunch that day. March 6, 1945 became a memorable day for the whole regiment. On this day, by the decree of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR, the high rank of Hero of the Soviet Union was awarded to the commander of the Link, Alexander Andreevich Bogachev. The motherland appreciated the merits of the glorious air fighter. When the war will be over and it will be time to summarize the results of everyone's combat activity, Bogachev will have 15 sunk enemy ships on his account, more than anyone else in our regiment. The same decree awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union to the deputy commander of the 3rd Squadron, Senior Lieutenant Mikhail Vladimirovich Borisov, navigator Ivan Ilyich Rokov, as well as the former flag navigator Major Grigory Antonovich Zavarin. Posthumously awarded the Order of the Red Banner awarded the former commander of the regiment Fyodor Andreevich Sitikov. And more about Bogachev. I again intend to break the chronological sequence of the narrative and return to the events of a month and a half ago. If you remember, having mentioned the note from Pravda, I promised to tell about the first combat flight of Captain Makarikin. Now it is high time to do it. Why do I find it interesting to cover this episode in detail? Now you will understand. When the squadron commander went into battle as a wingman of the regiment commander, there was nothing unusual in this. All, as they say, in the order of things the senior led the younger. But the very first combat mission Captain Makarikin carried out the wingman of the commander of the Link, junior in rank and flying experience, his former pupil, which a year and a half ago he taught himself flying skills. Yes, such paradoxes happened in the war. And it was like this. Early winter twilight had fallen on the airfield, and from the command post was no longer visible even the outskirts of the airfield, when we were informed of the latest intelligence. West of Libava detected enemy Convoy 2 transports accompanied by a destroyer, a patrol ship, 2 minesweepers and 7 patrol ships. Wow! I involuntarily burst out. They must be carrying something very important if they didn't skimp on such security. What are we going to do? Asked Captain Ivanov. Who shall we send? I watched as the wind drove from the sea-thick grey clouds, and thought that the conditions for torpedo attack are most favourable, but to pilot the plane, to make an accurate strike in the twilight will not be easy. And the landing will have to be made in the light of the plane headlights, which is also not easy at all, especially on our Palang patch. I should probably fly myself, I answered without much willingness, because this day I had already taken to the air several times with young pilots to practice piloting techniques, and frankly speaking, I felt tired. At the same time, it was impossible to delay a minute. You cannot miss the last shaky light of twilight. The Nazis must not leave. Why is it always you all by yourself? Ivanov objected. We have such powerful men on duty today. Aces. Remind me. Lead Bogachev, wingman Makarikin. They've been dreaming for a long time, and you. He spread his hands. And I conceded. The task was set, and in a minute 2 green rockets lifted the duty pair into the air. Bogachev had long promised his former mentor to show the war, as they said in our regiment, and now such an opportunity presented itself. When commissioning untrained crews, we always sent them together with an experienced leader, which often helped to avoid unnecessary losses, which often occurred during the first combat sorties. Only after 8 to 10 sorties the pilot practically learned the tactics of the battle, recognized the enemy's habits, began to act more sensibly and cold-bloodedly. The reconnaissance data were very accurate, and the crews quickly reached the target. The enemy, who did not expect at such a bad time attack from the air, was taken by surprise. Ships opened indiscriminate fire, but it did not prevent our pilots to attack. Bogachev torpedoed the lead transport. Makarikin struck the next one. Huge columns of smoke and flame soared over the sea, confirmed the success of the attack. Having recorded the sinking of ships, torpedo carriers safely landed at their airfield. The aircraft did not find a single, not even a shrapnel hole. If the effectiveness of attacks Bogachev already got used to and took them for granted, the victory Makarikin all regarded as a great success. You bet. In the first combat flight to sink a transport of 7,000 tons displacement, such in mine torpedo aviation was very rare. At the airfield, everyone already knew about the accurate strike's torpedo carriers. When Bogachev and Makarikin landed, they met almost the entire regiment, hugged, congratulated on their success. Out of nowhere came correspondence of the fleet and our aviation newspapers. They surrounded Fyodor Nikolaevich through questions. "Tell us your combat biography." Makarikin laughed, shrugged his shoulders. "And I have it, in fact, it is not. More precisely, it is just beginning." "How did you manage it?" The newspapermen didn't back down. "Very simply. We have many good pilots in our regiment. Here, for example, Bogachev, Borisov, Bashayev, Repin. All of them. They helped me, passed on their experience." Journalists attacked Bogachev. "What, in your opinion, is the secret of the fact that Captain Makarikin in the first combat flight acted as an experienced torpedo bomber?" In skill and endurance, he answered without hesitation. "Fyodor Nikolaevich will not take a chance." "He is a torpedo bomber by vocation," smiling, added navigator from Makarikin's crew, Senior Lieutenant A.P. Lajin. The next day after his baptism of fire, Makarikin flew in tandem with me, and if you remember, also succeeded. And at the beginning of February, Fedor Nikolaevich already, as a leader, led a group of planes on a mission. It was his third combat sortie. Visibility is limited, so the target came out unexpectedly and could not attack it. Makarikin made a bold, one might say daring decision to repeat the approach to the ships. Unfortunately, providing attack torpedo bearers topmast pilot's command did not understand and dropped bombs not on target. Torpedo bearers Makarikin and Inakiv had to take on all the fire of anti-aircraft artillery ships. Nevertheless, successfully combining maneuver and fire, they sank 2 large German transports. So 3 sorties, 3 sunk ships. A phenomenal success. We've never had such a success before. Makarikin, his navigator Lyasin, and gunner radioman V.G. Agafonov looked like birthday boys. Some people have already called them lucky. True, the re-entry, it was a risky maneuver, admitted later the crew commander. I still don't understand how it turned out, but it turned out great. To comprehend everything, you need to repeat it in a calm environment on the range. No, it's not just luck, of course. Competent assessment of the situation, correct maneuvering when attacking and leaving the zone of anti-aircraft fire, minimum time on a combat course, these are the ingredients of success. A little time will pass, and Makarikin will again make people talk about himself. A holiday is a holiday, and a deed is a deed. After the applause thundered, congratulations, greetings and heartfelt wishes were expressed to our new heroes of the Soviet Union, and only bones were left from the next roast piglet. I took to the air. With the onset of darkness, the command demanded not to stop mine laying. Ivanov and I decided not to touch the culprits of the celebration this evening. The wingman with me went to the commander of the Link D. Bashayev. Taking advantage of bad weather and low cloud cover, we, undetected by the enemy, reached the outport of Libava, dropped on the exit fairway of their cargo and safely returned to the airfield. We had been in flight for about an hour. From the dining room came voices and sounds of gramophone. There was still dancing, but I did not go in there, so as not to embarrass the young people with my presence, and went to my room. Dobritsky had not yet gone to bed. He was sitting at the table, covered with books with paper bookmarks sharpening from them, and as always he was writing something. You know, he broke away from the papers, apparently pleased with the opportunity to share his thoughts. The guys are in a great mood. The awards have raised their morale even higher. I think. It's not every day we get gold stars. Of course not. We've never been stingy with awards for the living. They all have medals. As I understood, he was impressed by the posthumous awarding of Sitikov and, especially, Zavarin. I wish they were alive. It's hard to talk to you today. Who's arguing, of course? But you should understand the guy's psychology. As they take to the air, each of them subconsciously thinks that this flight may be their last. Well, perhaps they don't think about it directly, but a thought like that will flicker in and out, don't they? Tell me. You've just come from there yourself. It happens. We're all human, we all want to live. And yet every time you try to push that thought away, you think, no, not today, not now. Today will pass. That's right. A man lives because he hopes. But one way or another, he realizes in war as in war, and maybe, on the ship he is flying to sink, there is a shell intended for him in the armory. Death in itself is scary, especially at 20-something. But our guys have learned to suppress fear. They are more afraid of another thing: you die and there will be no grave, no tombstone pyramid with your name and a red star. It's not like the infantry. Torpedo bombers don't have graves, you know that. To go unknown, to be lost forever, that's what's scary. And a posthumous award is a monument. A monument. What a monument. Let them better receive their awards in their lifetime, I said, summarizing the conversation. I'm ready to present them for awards even every day, if only for what? Oh, now you often have to present, laughed Grigory Vasilievich. In my opinion, the guys are ready to do wonders. I doubt that our Deputy Chief of Staff was enamored with the glory of the visionary, but in this case he really was unusually prescient. In the following days in the combat work felt a special boost and did not do without miracles in the literal and figurative sense of the word. Here is one of them. Do you remember, among the pilots who proved themselves masters of flights for additional reconnaissance of sea targets, I called, and the commander of the link, Lieutenant Grigory Vasilievich Poznik. So on March 11th, i.e. on the 5th day after the described celebrations in honor of our heroes, he was returning from a combat mission. Since he was flying alone and was afraid of meeting an enemy fighter, he tried to keep in the lower layers of clouds, which was quite high that day. Flying over one of the windows in the clouds, he looked down and suddenly saw an enemy transport plane U-52 on his left and below him. The enemy was flying so close, so carelessly. Attack and shoot it down. A daring thought flashed, and his palms even grew wet in anticipation of a fight. He had already begun to give the wheel from himself, intending to transfer Boston, in a gentle dive to pile on top, but then in the field of vision were two thin silhouettes of Messers, marching in the distance. This already changed the matter. Now himself would not get on the fly, and Poznik, levelling the plane, again dived into the clouds. However, a bold idea, born once, has not left him. Shoot it down, shoot it down. There will be no other such occasion. He turned a little airplane to look out another window, and was pleased to see that the Junkers is still on a parallel course. We had to make up our minds. Commander, why are we trotting? Concerned asked Navigator Lieutenant V. Mikhailik, who obviously decided that the pilot lost his bearings. Course to the airfield. He named the numbers. I remember, impatiently replied Poznik. Here, you know, Junkers down. The milky veil again separated them, and Poznik began to fear that he would lose sight of the transport. But here was a new gap, and Grigory sighed with relief. The German went the same course. Now or never, thought the pilot, and gave the helm forward. Boston sharply pecked the nose and obediently went hollow down, gaining speed. Poznik kept straight at the Junkers, and, when it was about 700 meters away, hit from all 6 course large-caliber machine guns. He saw how the fire trails, like angry wasps, stabbed into the dirty green body of the carrier in the pilot's cabin area, and immediately sharply took the helm, coming out of the dive. Otherwise it was not long to collide. Junkers haphazardly falling, and on the left, against the background of the sky, marked in a steep turn cross-shaped silhouettes of Messerschmitts turning around for the chase. Agafonov, look behind, shouted to the gunner radio over the intercom. Poznik, and giving maximum engine speed, with a gain in altitude, went into the saving clouds. He changed course and altitude several times, but the enemy fighters never appeared. Either they lost him in the solid milk, or they gave up pursuit altogether. At the airfield, the crew at first did not believe it. Here are pouring guys. But when they saw the falling Junkers on the pictures, which by some miracle managed to make Mikhailik, all doubts fell away. In the combat form of the regiment, which lists the results of the front-line activity of torpedo bearers, there is such a protocol dry record: aircraft shot down 1. This is the very trophy of Lieutenant G. Poznik. I don't know if there were such cases during the war when one heavy airplane shoots down another like a fighter. And they say that miracles do not happen. At about the same time with Viktor Nosov's crew, somewhere at the end of 1944, Junior Lieutenant Valentin Polyushkin, a graduate of the aviation school, arrived in the regiment. In the first control flight with him, I made sure that he was not badly prepared, in any case, much better than many of his peers. He confidently piloted the Boston, did not get lost when I made the situation more complicated by means of inputs, and shot off well on the range. Everything was explained quite simply. Since his youth he dreamed of aviation. After graduating from high school in Igorevsky, near Moscow, he entered the flying club. Finished his studies already during the war, and before reaching the age of 18, voluntarily applied for enrollment in the Naval Aviation School. In the youthful years, everything is seen somewhat differently than in mature years. The situation at the fronts at the beginning of the war was not in our favour. Komsomol cadets, brought up in the spirit of love for the motherland, were raring to go into battle. It seemed to everyone that it was his personal presence at the front that could bring a breakthrough. I asked to be sent to the front, at least as a private. Such reports lay on the table of the head of the school in stacks. And always he put a short and harsh resolution refuse. They were convinced the front needs pilots, fighters, attack aircraft, bombers. A lot of pilots, and therefore to study. Training programs could not keep up with the rapid development of aviation equipment and tactics of combat application of aviation. In 5 educational institutions, Cadet Polyushkin had to master flying skills before he was sent to our 51st MTAP. After the first export flights, he behaved exactly the same way as his other peers, who arrived to the regiment before and after him. "Let him go into combat," he asked, demanded, proved. "Don't hurry," his squadron commander Captain Mesherin reassured him. "Yours will not get away from you." "But I like to fly." "I know how to fly, Comrade Captain," Polyushkin got hot. "Until when am I to sit on the ground? The war is ending." Now, I don't remember which of our experienced pilots led the group when we released Polyushkin on his first combat flight. It is always a small holiday, too, a little sad. It always reminded me something of the 1st September farewell of a first grader to school. Here, Mechanic Sergeant Zatz reported on the readiness of the aircraft for departure, helped the pilot to get comfortable in the cockpit, corrected the parachute helmet. "Don't forget to switch the tanks, I." Medvedev, the regiment's engineer, shouted after him, though his voice was immediately drowned in the rumble of engines. Happy flight, waving to all hands, pilots, caps remaining on the ground. In that first combat flight, Valentin got his first victory. Their group sank a large transport. At the front, young pilots quickly matured, became stern, focused, not by years mature. The first victory allowed them not only to experience joy, but above all, to assert themselves, to feel self-confidence, to believe in their weapons. The first victory is like a successful chord in music, and Polyushkin, after the first successful combat sortie, revealed himself as a great air fighter. He flew, it seemed, without noticing fatigue, and constantly asked, demanded, "Fly, fly, fly." 5 times he brought the plane to the airfield hit. Once his torpedo carrier landed with 52 holes. The technicians examined the machine, and aghast, a piece of the depth rudder had been torn off and all the internal wiring had been broken. "Did you, Valentin, come here on enthusiasm?" "It's nothing." He waved away. "Now I'll fly to kill the Krauts." "Permission, Comrade Captain, to fly out in another car?" "Calm down, have a rest," Mesherin tried to dissuade him. "There is someone to fly besides you." "Permission, Comrade Captain." "They're here, very close, just there and back." He begged so insistently that it was impossible to refuse him. In the air, Polyushkin was unstoppable. What's interesting, there was no pattern to his actions. He did not repeat himself, was able to instantly grasp the location of ships in the convoy and find it weak points, poorly shot ways of approach. In the attack and leaving the zone of fire, he made sharp turns with sliding, and in the evening, summarizing the results of combat activity for the day, we were always convinced that today he acted differently than yesterday, that he again applied something new, his own. He was infinitely enthusiastic about his hard and dangerous work. It seemed that he did not know the feeling of fear. Once, when approaching the target, he was hit by a direct hit and the left engine was torn apart. It was not too late to get out of the battle and try to reach the airfield. But Valentin did not turn from the combat course. On one working engine he went to the transport and sank it, and only then took a course to his airfield. Mechanic Zatz examined the machine, and his hair stood on end. He counted about 300 shrapnel and bullet holes. It is simply amazing that no one from the crew was injured. After honouring our heroes and the Junkers shot down by Poznik, the first half of March gave us another joyous day. A group of torpedo carriers Bashayev, Kulinik, Petrov and Polyushkin sank 4 large transports with a total displacement of 3,000,000 tons. Polyushkin's crew got the 8,000er. Cover fighters, from above watching the defeat of the enemy convoy, not trying to contain admiration, shouted over the radio in open text. "Well done, torpedo bearers. Well done." At the command post, at the airplane parking lots everywhere, special battle lists, posters with the names of the winners. In the evening each crew was presented with personalized cakes. And just by the way, there was a Moscow concert team at the base. The artists skillfully inserted the names of the distinguished into their verses, and the whole concert seemed to be dedicated to the heroes of the day. It turned out great. And the next day almost ended tragically for Polyushkin's crew. On March 13th he flew as a wingman for his combat friend Viktor Kulinich. The weather Baltic, a continuous fog. However, the scouts who found the enemy convoy did not fail. Their data were absolutely accurate. Torpedo bearers boldly, with a move, attacked and sank the transport. However, Polyushkin's plane received over the target damage, punctured gas tank centerplane and fuselage. Gasoline doused navigator Yakovlev and gunner radio Plakhanov. It seemed that the fire is inevitable. But not a fire. Nothing is worse than a fire. But Polyushkin was not confused. He closed the damaged gas tank and continued the flight. Kulinik did not leave his comrade in trouble. He all the time flew a little higher and behind, covering Polyushkin from the possible appearance of enemy fighters, encouraged, gave advice. We landed safely. Well, it passed. Exhaled Plakhanov, taking off the parachute straps. The sooner we were approaching the complete victory over Hitler's fascism, the more fiercer the enemy resisted. Now many books have been written about what expensive price of human lives was paid for taking the stronghold of the Prussian military, the city and fortress of Königsberg. Tension of fights on the fronts was keenly felt by us, aviators. Every day of combat work turned into sleepless nights for the technical staff, because the wounded machines had to be put into operation in a short time. In front of me is an extract from the report of the senior engineer of the regiment Yakovlev. It says that out of 9 planes that flew out on a combat mission, 6 were significantly damaged. Plane, no. 18 2 direct hits of shells in the engines, no. 19 the left wing was punctured, no. 26 a direct hit of a shell in the fuselage, no. 23 on landing the front wheel was folded. When hitting the ground the torpedo came off the holders, the engine was triggered, the torpedo crawled along the ground, but did not explode. Technicians, toilers of war, low bow to you. Cold and wet March nights, knee-deep in mud and liquid snow mush, with scanty lighting and without any means of mechanization, they repaired and patched, soldered and riveted, carried on their shoulders and changed heavy parts and units, just so that by morning the plane would be ready for departure. On March 18th, the 15th Reconnaissance Air Regiment received data on the movement of the enemy convoy. Something had to be clarified, and I decided to make additional reconnaissance. Who should I send? Ostukevich? Ivanov suggested. For our reconnaissance in the regiment firmly established the fame of impenetrable, they were respectfully called Iron Guys, given their ability to act alone, willingness to repel attacks messes, to conduct long-term surveillance, constantly exposed to anti-aircraft fire. Plane Commander Ostukevich, his navigator I.T., Lobuko and gunner. T. Lobuko and gunner Radio Levshin belonged to the caste of impenetrable. Attached to the convoy and call the strike group. Point the planes at the target and record the result of the strike. I set the task to the crew. Ostukevich perfectly coped with the case. He quickly found the convoy, coming out of Danzig Bay course to the northeast. Well, clearly Hitler's command again decided to bring reinforcements and ammunition to their troops, huddled in Kurland. I decided to raise a group of 10 airplanes and led it to the mission myself. A squadron of cover fighters went up together with us. The attack was successful. We sank 3 large transports, a patrol ship, 1 transport damaged. There was a direct bomb hit on a light cruiser. Without losses, in high spirits, we returned to the airfield. Soon after our return to the command post came Dobritsky and Ivanov. Both of them looked at each other and smiled enigmatically. I looked at them with bewilderment. "Well, why are you playing silence?" "Do not guess yourself," Dobritsky asked. "I'm not a clairvoyant. Explain what's going on." "We came to familiarize you with our accounting seriously," explained the Chief of Staff. Now recorded today's trophies, and here is the result. He put in front of me a sheet of paper covered with dates, names and numbers. This is a record of the ships we have sunk. As you can see, we're approaching 100. I don't believe it. Really, I burst out, and my lips turned up in a smile. That's great. This news, I think, should be brought to everyone, said Grigory Vasilievich, and when it's the 100th, celebrate. Ruffling his curly hair, he thoughtfully looked out the window at the runway, on which after a short run-up fighter planes went into the sky. Wrinkles ran to the corners of his eyes, and I knew that mentally he was already calculating the plan of upcoming events. Party and Komsomol organizations under the leadership of Dobritsky unfolded in full swing. Airplane parking lots, dugouts where people lived, canteen decorated with posters showing the results of our combat work, as well as calls give the 100th. Agitators held talks NI. Konko, heroes of the Soviet Union Alexander Bogachev, Mikhail Borisov, Ivan Rakov, who had already become veterans of the regiment, spoke to their comrades. A kind of competition unfolded among technicians, mechanics, motorists. Everyone wanted his crew to sink the 100th. And it was realized on March 22nd. By that time, the regiment had relocated closer to the battlefield, to the Grabstein airfield. As a matter of fact, there was never any airfield in our usual sense. We simply chose a fairly flat area of abandoned fields on the border of the Lithuanian SSR, with East Prussia, 30 kilometers southeast of Memel, uprooted the interfering shrubbery and individual trees, leveled and laid metal strips runway of the necessary length. Good dugouts were built for housing, command post, canteen, warehouses and other services. Yes, we had a lot of hardship then. With what pleasure we remembered the airfield in Panivzis, with its cosy residential cottages, with a concrete runway. But here, in the middle of March, when we moved here, the soil had already thawed, the taxiways were immediately broken. The metal runway helped only half of the time. At takeoff and landing, the airplanes seemed not to roll on the runway, but to force a water barrier. The airplanes were covered with mud. It could not be cleaned off the landing gear, lifting and release mechanisms in time, which created prerequisites for flight accidents. There were no elementary conditions for repair and preparation of machines for flights. The ammunition was brought to the planes by hand, dragging it along the road with the car, which was mired up to the hubs of the wheels. Posters, all forces to the motherland, hung in the dormitories, we now perceived only in the literal sense, because we worked really at the limit of physical strength. Only the sense of duty and the proximity of the desired, long-awaited victory cheered people up, made them work through can't. These were the conditions in which our 100th was born. In the morning the weather did not bode well. Nevertheless, the regiment, as usual, was in full combat readiness, and not in vain after noon there were gaps in the clouds, and the airplanes of the reconnaissance regiment went into the air. And soon the first data arrived. Several convoys were detected at once. Apparently Hitlerites intended to maximize the use of bad weather to take everything they could from it. No, it won't work. And yet the weather is such that not everyone can be sent. I ordered Captain Makarikin to pick 2 crews in his squadron, well prepared to fly in difficult conditions, and myself to lead the link. A few minutes later, desperately roaring engines, sliding and rocking on taxiways, 3 Bostons stretched to the runway. The first to take off was FNN Makarikin, followed by Lieutenant B.Y. Shklayevsky, both with torpedoes. The last to take off was Lieutenant G.V. Poznik with bombs on board. Meanwhile, the clouds were thinning, the sky was getting lighter, and I, having consulted with Ivanov, decided to give combat missions to several more crews. With their departure at the airfield seemed to be a lull. It could seem so only to the uninitiated. N.I. Ivanov and the staff were preparing the necessary maps for the next flight. In the parking lots, technicians and mechanics repaired and prepared for flight remaining on the ground airplanes. Chief of Communications V. Bykov did not leave. Bykov did not leave the radio, providing communication with the crews who flew to the mission, responsible for that day's flights capped. Timofeev, constantly consulting with weather forecasters, looked at the sky every now and then whether the weather was changing, whether fog was coming from the sea. The regimental photographer F. Blinov had everything prepared to capture the heroes of the day on film. Time stretched unusually slowly, as it always happens when you are forced to wait, and nervous tension was growing. Everyone was waiting for the first message. And then, finally, reported Captain Makarikin attacked and sunk the transport. I'm returning to the airfield. At the command center, an explosion of delight. Hurrah! Hurrah! There is the 100th. Well done, Makarikin. Joyful excitement, smiles on everyone's faces. And immediately we received a radiogram from Shklayevsky. He and Poznik managed to sink a floating dock. Hurrah! We've started the second 100. And in a few minutes reports of other pilots, Lieutenant V, Kulinich and Junior Lieutenant I. Amishkin, by a combined strike, sent to the bottom of the Baltic a transport of 6,000 tons, displacement Lieutenant V. Petrov and Junior Lieutenant Balakin sank a transport of 8,000 tons. Lieutenant Astukevich and Junior Lieutenant Stepashenko destroyed a transport of 8,000 tons displacement. Well, the guys are going wild. Lieutenant Boris Shklayevsky later told, because of low clouds we flew at a height of several tens of meters above sea level. We were only minutes away from the supposed meeting point with the enemy. And now the estimated time had expired, and the convoy was not detected. We have to look for it. Since the reconnaissance had spotted several convoys in this area, Captain Makarikin ordered me and Poznik to go in pairs to approach another target, and he himself began the search. In about 40 minutes we saw smoke on the horizon, and then the ships themselves. I gave my wingman the command attack. With every second the target became clearer and clearer and clearer. Already it became clear to see how two large tugboats, whipping foamy turbulence behind the stern, pulled a huge floating dock with some ship inside. It was guarded by 2 destroyers and 5 patrol ships. Having noticed us, the Nazis opened hurricane fire. The sky around was boiling. From the bursts of anti-aircraft shells, airplanes tossed as if flying in a thundercloud. Maneuvering, we responded with fire from all their machine guns. I made a few turns, maintained flight mode, and dropped a torpedo from a short distance. Leaving the firing zone, I saw the bombs dropped by Poznik hit the dock. It was shrouded in black smoke and began to sink. On the way out, my navigator Ishov managed to take some pictures confirming the success of the attack. And yet Captain Makarikin managed to get ahead of us. A few minutes earlier he met another convoy and attacked a transport of 3,000 tons. Technicians, mechanics, officers of the headquarters cordially greeted the winners, and those happy, forgetting about fatigue, hurried to the CP to report. So for the day 5 units, including a floating dock. The 100th ship let down the crew Makarikin. The beginning of the second 100 laid the crews of B. IA. Shklayevsky and G.V. Poznik. And in the evening all met at a friendly table. I presented the authors of the 100th and 101st with a traditional gift, a roasted piglet. Raising a glass, proclaimed a toast to their success, to the success of all pilots who distinguished themselves that day, and began a new countdown of the combat history of the regiment. The next day the whole country heard the report of Sovinform Bureau about the victory of our pilots at sea. And in a special leaflet issued by the political department of the division, it was noted that during the last week of combat operations the pilots of 51 MTA P achieved remarkable results. Having defeated several enemy caravans, they brought the number of sunk ships to 100. March, March. It is not only impenetrable mud on the rickety airfield and water fireworks on the runway at landing. It is the gentle, invigorating frost in the morning, the rooks cawing in the neighbouring birch grove, the fabulous purity and transparency of the sky azure, the exhilarating and intoxicating breath of spring. Something in the behaviour of the Chief of Communications, Senior Lieutenant Volodya Bykov, recently began to seem strange to me. Very often he began to report like this, Comrade Major, if anything, I'm at the regimental radio station. I'll check it out. Everything became clear on the day when Makarikin shot down the 100th. Then, having seen off all the crews in the air, Bykov and I went to the radio station. Faina Mushitskaya was on duty. No sooner had we asked her about communication with the airplanes than she, warning the question, said they're silent for now. Volodya immediately she blushed and looked at me with a guilty smile. Embarrassed, and Bykov stood with his head down. In the evening, during a festive dinner, I asked him, "Is it serious with you? Or just like that?" "Seriously, Comrade Major. We love each other." "Think carefully. Check yourself. Love should go through your whole life," he said, and thought to himself, war is war, but life still takes its course. Two young men met and love came to them. And no war, no harsh environment can prevent it. Life. Not unlike other units, we had surprisingly few girls in our regiment, a few radio operators, and a couple or two in the service units. Of course, they could not hang our multi-ton torpedoes and bombs with their weak arms. I must say that the presence of the weaker sex had a very beneficial effect on our guys. They got used to watch their appearance, strong words disappeared from their vocabulary. And what attention surrounded the girls at the regimental amateur concerts, at recreation evenings. There, at least, our Pisarchuk Sonia, everyone wanted to dance with her. And she favoured Navigator Nikolai Konko. And then we made a good couple. Asked for permission to marry, and Bykov. Something hesitated me and did not hurry to give consent. Major Dobritsky acted as a lawyer. "Why are you torturing people? They have love. Real, pure, light God grant everyone. Try to disagree here. We celebrated Volodya's wedding with Faina. It was fun. I had to play the role of a father in prison." "Are you glad?" I asked Faina. "Very happy." "Thank you, Ivan Feofanovich. What's in it for me?" "For everything, for everything. Volodya and I will live happily ever after." And in fact, they had a strong and happy Soviet family. The battle tension was increasing every day. Successful offensive of ground troops, crushing the enemy already on his territory, gave hope for a soon victorious end of the war. Victory. It was desired and close, and in the name of its achievement people acted to the limit of their strength and capabilities. Now, a repeated flight during the day was not considered, as before, as something out of the ordinary, all the strength, all the will to victory. It is pleasant, of course, to remember about our successes in battles, about small and big celebrations in our friendly front collective. But, as they say, you can't take words out of a song. From a documentary story, even more so. Unfortunately, the conquest of supremacy at sea and in the air was given to us at a high price. The end of March brought a lot of grief, and the 26th day was written in black paint in the history of the regiment. On that day we lost two excellent pilots, two wing commanders. Lieutenant G.G. Yenikiev, after a successful attack, delayed over the target to photograph the results of the strike of his group, and was shot down by enemy anti-aircraft fire. This was a real air fighter. He had 8 sunk enemy transports on his account. He liked precision in everything. Often bad weather, strong anti-aircraft artillery did not allow to accurately determine the results of the attack. In the headquarters in such cases even took into question the combat reports of the crews and counted either a minimum of destroyed objects or not counted at all. Yenikiev to the end wanted to be honest. And by evening came another sad message. Lieutenant II, Repin, the holder of 4 orders of the Red Banner, sank a patrol ship in the Danzig Bay, but his plane was seriously damaged. The pilot failed to reach his shore and was forced to crash land at sea. Soon our torpedo boat, specially sent from Svetoya to pick up the crew, picked up Repin, the navigator, Lieutenant VP, Lonsky and the gunner, P. Lonsky and gunner Radio Sergeant NS Samoylov. The boat took a course to the shore, but then fascist fighters came and shot it at point-blank range. The boat caught fire and exploded. None of those who were on it were saved. It was a heavy loss. Our basing in close proximity to sea communications gave the Germans a lot of trouble. To somehow limit the action of torpedo carriers, the enemy has concentrated in the Baltic significant forces of its fighter aviation. But it didn't help much. We now constantly went on missions under the reliable cover of our neighbours' pilots of the 14th or 21st Fighter Regiments. We had established close cooperation and complete mutual understanding with them. When Messers or Fokkers appeared in the sky, our fighters immediately imposed a fight on them, did not allow them to torpedo carriers, forced them to get away. In the spring of the victorious 45th, our dominance in the air was absolute, and the enemy was looking for new tactics, new forms of struggle with our torpedo aircraft. Once, a group of torpedo bearers met a small enemy steamer at sea, puffing alone, unguarded, in the direction of the island of Bornholm. The enemy is the enemy, and to miss it with impunity made no sense, but not to discharge all the airplanes on it. And it was a pity to use a torpedo for such a thing, especially since a meeting with a large transport was expected ahead. The leader ordered one of the wingmen to attack and sink the enemy, and then return to base. The group took its own course, and Junior Lieutenant IG. Dejtjar turned aside and began to turn around to attack from the starboard side. The doomed ship understood the pilot's maneuver. There shone a few flashes of shots the shells burst with underflight. What warriors! Dejtjar dropped to 30 meters and went straight at the enemy. And then the unexpected happened. The steamship, showing unexpected agility and maneuverability, managed to make a sharp turn towards the torpedo carrier. It simultaneously fell down fake deck superstructures, opening a lot of anti-aircraft gun barrels, dropped on the plane a tight sheaf of fire. It was a trap ship. It is unclear how miraculously the crew managed to avoid death. Dejtjar almost aimlessly dropped the bombs and sharply, with a glide, threw the lightened Boston even lower, to the water. This was probably what helped him get away. He brought the plane to the airfield pretty battered by shrapnel and bullets, but the crew, fortunately, was not injured. At the same time, at the flight review, we warned all crews about the appearance of trap ships. However, and the enemy, convinced that his trickery unravelled, soon abandoned their use. Improved and changed tactical methods, and we began to use high-altitude torpedo throwing, which, like every new technique, gave good results. Now more and more often struck en masse, sometimes almost the entire fleet air force, and no enemy convoy or detachment of enemy warships detected by scouts did not go without losses. So, on April 11th, in the midst of fighting for the naval base of Hitler's Pillau, 328 planes were raised in the air, which destroyed 13 transports, 1 destroyer, 6 patrol ships, damaged 6 transports. From our regiment in this operation participated in 25 torpedo carriers and topmaster Vikami, acting in groups of 5 aircraft. April 12th flew about 400 aircraft, with torpedo carriers and attack aircraft were the main strike force. Was sunk 4 transports, 2 patrol ships, fast landing barge, and damaged several transports with troops and equipment. However, it was not without losses on our side. In this battle 7 of our airplanes were badly damaged. The airplane of Junior Lieutenant B.A. Balakin was shot down by anti-aircraft artillery fire and crashed into the sea. Then the navigator of the 3rd Squadron, Captain G.N. Sharapov, was seriously wounded. And on April 13th we lost one of our most experienced pilots, holder of 4 Orders of the Red Banner, Flight Commander Lieutenant Dmitry Bashayev. He had 14 sunk enemy ships on his combat account. I loved Bashayev, this courageous man. I flew with him more than once in a pair and was always calm. Dmitry would not let me down. And now he was gone. The crew did not return from a combat mission. The harsh waters of the Baltic became his final resting place. I knew Dmitry and was sure that he, as well as the navigator A.G., Arbuzov and the gunner who died with him, G., Arbuzov and gunner Radiator NAT Bulantsev fought to the end. Glorious combat feats of torpedo bombers were highly appreciated by the motherland. On April 20th, 1945, for valour and courage shown in battles with the Nazi invaders, 51st Regiment of Mine Torpedo Aviation was awarded the Order of Oshakov, II degree. Many pilots, technicians, mechanics were honoured with high government awards. Order of Ushakov I degree received, and the author of these lines. In a special leaflet issued by the political department of the Baltflot Air Force, many kind words were said about the pilots of our regiment. It ended with an appeal: Falcons of the Baltic. The example of torpedo bearers of Tallinn calls you to new feats for the sake of our victory. Stronger blows on the enemy. To the bottom of the German fleet. To the bottom of the Hitlerites, that's where they belong. Death to the Nazi invaders. People are tired of war. Even awarding the regiment a high award, awarding orders and medals to the awarded and related to this building, meeting, gala dinner, were held this time, alas, with less enthusiasm than a few months ago, when the first order shone on the banner of the regiment. Why should we be surprised? Major Dobritsky reasoned in the evening, when we were finally left alone. There are many reasons for this. First of all, inhuman nervous tension. Can you remember when we've ever flown as intensely as we do now? You don't remember. I don't remember. And look how thin our ranks have gotten. What's it like for the guys to see empty seats in the mess hall where their comrades sat yesterday? It's hard. On April 24th, on the eve of the capture of our troops' Pillau, in the air rose almost all serviceable aircraft of the regiment: 10 torpedo carriers, 10 topmast and 3 reconnaissance aircraft. And this time in the air, under the cover of fighters, was on duty seaplane, ready to save stricken crews if they have to make a forced landing on the water. We operated in 4 groups. We managed to sink 2 transports and 2 high-speed artillery landing barges. These successes brought satisfaction, but it was invariably mixed with a sense of bitterness, the pain of irreparable loss. After the return of groups from a combat mission, several airplane parking lots remained empty. And technicians, mechanics, motorists, armourers lowered their heads, sluggishly wandered to the barracks, realising that there would be no meeting with those whom they had seen off an hour ago. The pilot, Junior Lieutenant P.E. Nazarenko, showed exceptional courage and willpower. When leaving the attack, he was wounded by shrapnel in the head and leg, and the airplane was significantly damaged. Blood was flooding his eyes. He had to control the machine with one hand and one leg. Tensing the last forces, the pilot still reached the airfield, but when he released the landing gear before landing, a fire broke out. What must be the self-control to control the burning airplane, which at any moment could begin to fall apart in the air? One was afraid. Nazarenko later told me, as if not to lose consciousness. With my right hand I was adjusting the throttle sector and even held the steering wheel with my teeth. On the ground it was still necessary to press both brakes, and my head was getting cloudy. How did he manage to land the airplane? It's incomprehensible. Nazarenko came to his senses already in the hospital, where he had 32 shrapnel wounds. But for Junior Lieutenant I.G. Dechiar, the flight that day became the last one. He skillfully attacked and sank a fast landing barge, but his Boston was also hit. Fighter pilots, providing our cover, saw Degchiaria's plane went into a steep descent and fell into the water. Apparently the crew commander was seriously wounded or killed, we can only assume. The crew of Junior Lieutenant M.K. Maltsev did not return from the combat mission. Our pilots, who were in the group with him, told later that Maltsev successfully bombed the enemy transport, but when leaving the attack was shot down by anti-aircraft artillery fire from the guard ships. The torpedo carrier exploded in the air. Heroism, unbending courage of our pilots, reaching the point of self-sacrifice, in those days no one was surprised. We have somehow got used to it, it became the norm. But I would like to tell about one episode when specialists of ground services showed themselves real heroes. During the attack of German ships in the base of Pillau was severely wounded pilot Junior Lieutenant A. Brovchenko. Losing his last strength, the courageous pilot still reached his airfield, but the airplane, riddled with shells and bullets, caught fire at the end of the run. The machine did not stop, and the ammunition already began to explode in it, with a loud cracking burst cartridges from large-caliber machine guns and tracer bullets drawing in the air fiery tails, flying in the most unpredictable trajectories. The fire was getting closer to the gas tanks, there was not a second to lose, and people from all the parking lots rushed to the plane. Disregarding the mortal danger, they pulled out of the cockpit severely wounded Brovchenko, wounded and burned navigator and gunner radiator, and managed to carry them to a safe distance before the explosion sounded. It was decided to send collective letters to the mothers of Dektyar, Maltsev, their navigators and gunner radiators who died in the battles for Pillow. Victory was close. It was perfectly understood both at the front and in the rear, the more bitter were the losses in those days. We realized that the grief of mothers was immense, but we hoped that our participation would help them to feel not alone in their grief, to survive the weight of irreplaceable loss. "You can rightfully be proud of your son, who gave his life for the happiness of our fatherland," wrote the pilots. "In the person of your son we lost the best battle comrade and swear to mercilessly avenge the enemy. The memory of your son will live in our hearts forever. His bright image will inspire us for new combat feats." And the pilots firmly kept their word. By the end of April 1945, there were two important strategic directions of Soviet troops' actions in the Baltic. One of them was Kolberg-Swinemünde-Rostock. In this direction were advancing troops of the Second Belarusian Front, which had already occupied Stettin, and were preparing to storm the enemy's naval base of Swinemünde. The second direction was the Kurland Peninsula, where continued to stubbornly resist a group of German armies, with its feeding ports of Libava and Vindava. It was opposed by the troops of the Leningrad Front. Commanders of both fronts demanded from the command of the Red Banner Baltic Fleet to provide the flanks of their troops and assistance in the liquidation of the blocked group. People's Commissar of the Navy Admiral N.G. Kuznetsov considered the first direction to be the main one and ordered to concentrate most of the aviation and ships on it. For this purpose, on April 29th, our 51st MTAP moved to the airfield near the town of Kolberg. Together with us, what is called wing-to-wing, flew and our constant companions in the last combat attacks pilots of the 21st Red Banner Fighter Air Regiment, commanded by hero of the Soviet Union Lieutenant Colonel P. I. Pavlov. A little earlier, the 7th Attack Air Regiment under the command of twice hero of the Soviet Union Lieutenant Colonel A.E.Mo. E. Mazurenko, with whom we also very quickly found a common language, redeployed here. The airfield was located in close proximity to the coastline, had two parallel concrete runways, and was in good condition. In their hasty retreat, the Germans left all the living quarters untouched and had time to blow up only the hangars. But it did not matter much to us. We were accommodated at the airfield with great comfort, and soon Grabstein, with its cramped and damp dugouts, with slush underfoot, with its metal, fountaining mud runway, appeared in memory only as a vision from a terrible dream. Here, on German soil, we could observe amazing pictures. All roads and highways were jammed with refugees. Exhausted women and old people carried babies in baby carriages. Those of the older ones, who still had strength, were pulling carts loaded with household goods. Having made sure that the Red Army, contrary to Goebbels' propaganda, was not committing any massacres against civilians, they returned to their abandoned homes. Our troops had already reached the Oder River, occupied the entire coast of the Baltic Sea, except for Cape Hell and the naval base of Swinemünde. The enemy not only brought reinforcements and equipment by sea to these groups cut off from the land, but at the same time carried out evacuation from there, supported the garrisons pressed to the shore by ship artillery fire. After the fall of Pillow and the ports in the Danzig Bay, the importance of Swinemünde for the Germans increased significantly. Here accumulated a huge number of vehicles and warships. From here the supply of Courland ports was carried out. Swinemünde became the main naval base of the enemy in the southern part of the Baltic Sea. Ships based here shelled the right flank of the 2nd Belarusian Front units advancing along the coast. The ship's actions were covered by fighters of the 1st German Air Fleet. Every day it became more and more obvious the necessity of quick mastering of the naval base and the city of Swinemünde. The Soviet command carefully prepared an offensive operation with the participation of a large number of strike and support forces of the fleet aviation. In the headquarters of the Air Force boiled work. As has happened many times before, When such operations were conducted with the simultaneous departure of many aircraft, a clear scheme was developed, which provided for the order of strike by the main force's torpedo carriers and Topmoskoviki 51 MTAP, as well as the actions of attack aircraft and fighters, providing the work of strike groups. Conducting reconnaissance and subsequent control of the results of the strike by visual observation and photography were entrusted to the pilots of the 15th Reconnaissance Regiment under the command of hero of the Soviet Union, Lieutenant Colonel F.A. Usachev, with whom we have previously interacted repeatedly. The mood in the regiment was high. Inspired by the victories of the Red Army, we were all looking forward to the end of the war, and everyone was eager to bring the victory closer to contribute to the final blow. More and more often officers, sergeants and soldiers gathered at the map of military operations, admired the victorious march of Soviet troops on the land of Nazi Germany, and, of course, everyone cherished the hope that he would be lucky enough to take part in the storming of Swinemünde. Especially worried young pilots who arrived from the school to our replenishment, demanding to let them immediately on the mission so the war will end, and we will not make a single combat sortie. However, in the first days of May, overcast weather, with low clouds and dense fogs, did not allow to make a massive strike. Only flights in small groups were made on communications Rostock-Libava. The weather smiled at us on May 4th. And the day before, late in the evening, the commander of the 8th Mine Torpedo Air Division, our immediate superior, Colonel M. Kurochkin, called me to the office and set the task by dawn all the staff of the regiment. According to the air reconnaissance to be in readiness to destroy enemy warships and transports on communications and on the approaches to the naval base Swinemünde and ports occupied by the Nazis' Danish island Bornholm. As usual, participate in the operation attack aircraft and fighters cover. For several days we have been waiting for such an order, so we prepared in advance for its implementation. Gathered together with the commanders of the attack and fighter regiments, talked and agreed on all issues of interaction. It remained only to wait for the arrival of data from the scouts. The sky outside the window began to turn blue when I was awakened by the rumble of engines from the runway, went into the air several looping of scouts, and with dawn we have already received full information. On the outer roadstead of Swinemünde detected training battleship Schlesien, cruiser Prince Eugen, auxiliary cruiser Orion, destroyers, patrol ships, fast landing barges, up to a dozen transports displacement of 5,000 to 8,000 tons each, a tanker. In addition, in the water area of the port counted 6 transports and quite a powerful group of warships, about 40 pennants. It looked as if almost all underwater watercraft, which the enemy command had in this area of the Baltic, had gathered here. A hot day awaited us. The airfield had long since come to life. As always, dealing with moving targets, we were fed with air reconnaissance data and therefore were in constant readiness for takeoff. And here, at last, the order from the division headquarters to torpedo bomb the battleship Schlesien and destroy it. The order is military brief and concise, but we knew what was behind such brevity. It was the main caliber guns Schlesien inflicted the greatest damage to our troops. In addition, it trained naval specialists, who then replenished the crews of German ships. Right, the battleship deserved the honor of being sunk in the first place. Since, as I said, we were waiting for this order, working out the decision to fight did not take much time. In accordance with the scheme developed in the division headquarters, I decided to allocate from the composition of the 1st and 3rd squadrons 1 torpedo carrier and 4 topmast. It was in these squadrons for the day had the most serviceable machines, as well as more experienced crews. We knew that on the raid Swinemünde depths are shallow, so the main means of defeat chose large caliber bombs. I have already noted above that our torpedo, when dropped, dives to a depth of 20 meters, and where stood Schlesien, it did not exceed 10. Nevertheless, divisional specialists insisted on trying as an experiment aircraft torpedoes 4536 An, and we decided to hang torpedoes on the leading aircraft. During this operation, we decided to apply another tactical novelty, to withdraw the strike and support groups to the target area, and manage them during the attack. It was decided to raise the crew of the commander of the 2nd Squadron, Captain F.N. Makarikin, who was to perform the function of the command post in the air. As events have shown, this technique fully justified itself. On the decision-made headquarters formalized the order and made a planning table, and I set a combat task to the crews. To strike a blow to the battleship established the following order of movement of groups of aircraft: attack aircraft go ahead of torpedo bearers and topmast at a distance of 1.52 kilometers and dispersed, strike at ships that may by their fire to interfere with the task of the strike groups. At 10:30 am the airfield was filled with the rumble of engines. 12 swift and bright Yak-9 fighter cover, under the command of Major Yusichenko Friendly, took off and disappeared into the blue sky. After them Makarikin's crew went into the air and immediately 24 humpbacks, as we lovingly called L2, took off in pairs. Behind them rose 2 of our 5 from the 1st Squadron, leading Senior Lieutenant V. Fomenko with a torpedo. His wingmen were topmast pilots I. Smolyanov, N. Linik, A. Gorbushkin and V. Ustukevich. They were not out of sight, and the planes from the 5 of the 3rd Squadron had already taken off the leading hero of the Soviet Union, Senior Lieutenant M. Borisov with a torpedo and 4 topmast pilots V. Kulinich, V. Martinov, F. Kozenko and N. Efremtsev. They took off beautifully, wing to wing, as if on parade, and the heart involuntarily inspired hope for the success of the operation. An hour later, the strike groups came from the northeast on the roadstead of Swinemunde. Even from afar recognized the battleship Schlesien, which was adrift. Immediately, the entire raid was bristling with flashes of gunfire. On the course of torpedo carriers stood water columns from the bursts of shells of the main caliber. Stormtroopers with a move began shelling ships, trying to suppress anti-aircraft fire. At the command to prepare to attack, given from the control plane, Fomenko's and Borisov's units took their initial positions on the combat course indicated to them. And then, the command attack Topmastoviki developed speed to the maximum and, breaking ahead of the torpedo carriers, from a distance of 250 to 300 meters, dropped bombs. From the attack had to come out of the attack, jumping over the targets, clinging to the water itself, maneuvering in the direction. Fomenko and Borisov dropped torpedoes from a distance of 8,001,000 meters, left turn out of the attack, and headed for the predetermined assembly area. In general, the attack was successful, but, unfortunately, not without losses on our part. A half-ton bomb, dropped by Junior Lieutenant N. Lint, hit the Schlesien and there was a fire on it. However, when passing over the battleship, the airplane exploded in the air from a direct hit of a shell. Together with Linik, Navigator Junior Lieutenant V. Zalazin and Gunner Radiator Sergeant S. A. Spiridonov died a brave death. Lieutenant V. Kulinik attacked a 6,000-ton transport standing next to the battleship and sank it with a direct hit of Fab 1000. Pilots I. Smolyanov and N. Efremtsev targeted a transport of 8,000 tons displacement and hit it with 2 large-caliber bombs. Lieutenant A. Gorbushkin aptly hit a minesweeper with a bomb, which immediately sank. 2 crews from Borisov's group had to return halfway to the airfield because of technical malfunctions and did not participate in the attack. The course of torpedoes Fomenko and Borisov and hit them in the battleship was not observed still, in all likelihood, affected the shallow water. The group returned to the airfield in formation and landed safely. However, even here we had to worry a lot. Smolyanov's plane was hit directly by an anti-aircraft shell, and 1 engine was disabled. The pilot was not confused. In time put the propeller in the weather vane position and, maneuvering at low altitude, managed to take the machine out of the zone of anti-aircraft fire. He brought the airplane to the airfield, but the attempt to release the landing gear was unsuccessful. The hydraulic system was also badly damaged by shrapnel. We watched with excitement as Smolyanov went for the second round, and then with the retracted landing gear, literally rubbed the machine to the grass next to the runway. The airplane received minimal damage, and no one from the crew was injured, but only a third of the planned operation was behind us. At 16 o'clock, the second group of airplanes, headed by hero of the Soviet Union Senior Lieutenant A. Bogachev, took to the air. In its formation no longer had to adhere to the squadron principle. The group turned out to be a collection. Bogachev flew with a torpedo. Wingmen were 5 topmast pilots with bombs V. Fomenko, V. Petrov, F. Kozenko, B. Kozlov, V. Martinov. As in the first flight, to coordinate the actions of the strike group and providing the operation of 16L2 and 8 Yak-9, went up and Captain F. Makarikin. And again the frantic fire of ships, daring attacks of attack aircraft and torpedo bombers. This time there were no enemy fighters over Swinemünde, so our fighter cover had nothing else to do but to watch the battle. There was recorded a powerful underwater explosion at the very side of the battleship, noted a direct hit of bombs in the transport, which immediately sank. Received heavy damage to the destroyer, auxiliary cruiser Orion and another transport. But Schlesien still remained afloat. The last blow was struck on the cruiser at 20 hours by a group of aircraft, which Makarikin headed already as a leader. With him flew 5 Topmoskovikov V, Astukevich A, Gorbushkin V, Kulinik B, Kozlov and N. Efremtsev. 16 attack aircraft and 8 fighters provided their actions in this flight. During the attack, the crews observed a direct hit on the battleship by 1 Fab 1000 and 4 Fab 250. It developed several large and small fires, plunged into the water, and landed in shallow water on an even keel, as confirmed by several photographs. Although the ship's fighting deckhouse and deck remained on the surface, they were a jumble of scrap metal. The forward 2-gun turret of the main caliber was knocked down, its gun barrels were lying on the deck, the middle part of the battleship was burned out. In addition, it was noted the sinking of transports, displacement of 8,000 tons, a direct hit of bombs in the destroyer, minesweeper, patrol ship. By the end of the day, to the command post of the regiment representatives of all units involved in the operation. Once again clarified the data observation of the results of strikes on enemy ships, intelligence service decrypted photos, verified their data with the scouts and attackers. All headquarters specialists and unit commanders interviewed the crews and compiled combat reports. Workers of the Air Force headquarters hastened us with reports to the fleet commander. A thorough review and summarizing the results of combat operations of the regiment for May 4th, we were able to do only the next day. In total for the past day we were dropped 4 torpedoes and 41 large-caliber bombs. The results, we can say, exceeded all expectations. In addition to the battleship Schlesien were sunk auxiliary battleship Orion, 6 transports with a total displacement of 29,000 tons, 2 destroyers, 2 minesweepers, and a patrol ship. Seriously damaged cruiser Prince Eugen, 3 destroyers, a patrol ship and a transport of 3,000 tons displacement. A special commission of the KBF, which included a representative from 51 MTAP, considered the circumstances of the strike on the Schlesien, and found that the battleship had several direct hits of large-caliber bombs, and there was a hole, which could be the result of the explosion of a 1,000-kilogram bomb in shallow water near the side of the ship. According to the conclusion of the higher command, the operation was successful. The whole staff showed unwavering steadfastness, courage, great desire to fulfill the task at all costs. 2 combat sorties per day made Deputy 1st Squadron V. Fomenko, Wing Commanders V. Kulinik V. A. Kulinik V. Astukevich A. Gorbushkin and pilot N. Efremtsev. But especially distinguished the commander of the 2nd Squadron, Captain F.N. Makarikin, who made that day 4 combat sorties. And it happened like this. After the 3rd group, which he headed, returned to the airfield, Fyodor Nikolaevich came to the command post, reported to me about the fulfillment of the combat mission and said, "One pilot complained that the target on his airplane did not work the electric ejector. We tested it in the parking lot, it works fine. I asked permission to fly out and test near the airfield, near the coastline. Makarikin got permission, but he flew to Swinemünde to finish the damaged large Nazi transport. This was his 4th flight. I want to note that no one in the regiment had such a record number of combat sorties during one day. On May 5th, the troops of Marshal K. Rokossovsky took Swinemünde. After that, the garrison of the island of Rügen capitulated. The personnel of the regiment was honoured with 2 more commendations of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief. Now there were already 9 of them. And later, in July 1945, when there was an opportunity to take a break after the war, to look around, to take time to analyse the combat operations, the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR for active participation in the May operations and for the courage and bravery shown in doing so awarded 51 MTAP with the 3rd Combat Order, the Order of Nakhimov I degree. At the beginning of May, the KBF command started to prepare sea and air landing on the island of Bornholm, where the Germans created a base for their ships coming from Western Germany to Courland, and where they were taking a large number of troops from Pomerania. To our ultimatum to surrender the island, the Nazis refused. On May 5th, our command warned the population of the island about the forthcoming air strikes on ports and fascist ships, so that the inhabitants left port facilities and other buildings in the ports of Rennes and Nix and went to the forests. Following this warning, Navy aviation launched devastating strikes on ships in these ports. The days of Nazi Germany were numbered. This was understood by both opposing sides, and the more incomprehensible was the inexplicable stubbornness of the Nazis, who rejected all offers of surrender. For almost a week the victory banner was flying over the defeated Reichstag. The Allied armies had already met in the centre of Germany on the Elbe River. Hitler had already committed suicide, who had plunged his country and the whole world into a devastating war that had claimed tens of millions of human lives, and the scattered groups of Hitler's troops continued to offer fierce resistance. What were they hoping for? In order to avoid unnecessary losses and unnecessary bloodshed, the Soviet command on May 8th openly transmitted to the chief of the garrison of the island of Bornholm radiogram with a demand for immediate surrender, but this demand was rejected. Nothing else was left but to resume the attacks. I received the order to strike with all available forces of the regiment and myself led groups of aircraft. Under cover of fighters, we at 11.20 we made a powerful bombing strike on ships and port facilities in the port of Rennes. The combat load was 2,000 kilogram bombs for each plane. In the area of the middle breakwater, there were up to 20 fires. Black smoke clouds covered the entire port. After refueling the vehicles with fuel and ammunition, and a short rest of the crews, I again took the regiment into the air. This time we set a course for the port of Nix. Our Yak again cleared the sky over the island from enemy fighters, and at 16.30, from an unusual height for us at 2,300 meters, we struck the port and ships standing in its water area. Anti-aircraft fire of the defending, although it was very dense, was ineffective. We were without losses. Explosions were very strong, and the smoke reached the height of our flight reported to me after the departure from the target recently appointed navigator of the regiment, Captain F.T. Pryakin. Where will we record the explosions in the port? He lamented in the evening. After all, we need ships. To the personal account of victory, and this is the main thing, one of the pilots responded vividly. And at 6 a.m. On May 9th, our landing force landed from ships and planes of the Baltic Fleet in the port of Rennes. Only after that, the commander of the German Corps, Lieutenant General Gutmann, and the senior naval chief, Captain First Rank von Kalitz, as representatives of the headquarters of Hitler's troops, agreed to capitulate.